any player who has played World of Warcraft since the early days probably knows of a infamous little island known as GM Island. GM Island has been known to exist pretty much since the very beginning of World of Warcraft's history. However, contrary to popular belief, it has never actually been possible to reach GM Island without exploiting the game. Now, with World of Warcraft patch 8.2 dropping next Tuesday, June 25th, this piece of WoW history is getting removed from the game entirely. I wanted to pay homage to this legendary piece of WoW history. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the history of GM Island. As previously mentioned, GM Island has existed as long as World of Warcraft itself has existed. The origins surrounding it are one shrouded in mystery, even to its very own creators. GM Island has often mystified not only the player base that has been aware of its existence, but GMs themselves still to this day remain unclear as to its true purpose and origin. And while it ultimately remains unclear a definitive timeline on when players became aware of GM Island's existence, it can be traced back to the very earliest days of World of Warcraft. See, before patch 1.8 of vanilla World of Warcraft, GMs could actually be added to your friends list back in the day. Oftentimes, if a GM was on your friends list, it would show them being on GM Island. As well as being able to be added to friends list, obviously they showed up on the /who menu as well, which also allowed you to see GMs on GM Island. This only added to the mystery of a secret zone in World of Warcraft. Now, there was a similar hysteria in early World of Warcraft around the legendary weapon Ashbringer, as that was also archived from WoW files, and people assumed that that was in the game as well. Now, unlike Ashbringer, GM Island actually was in the game. As known from the previously mentioned facts, this allowed the mystery of GM Island to spread quickly amongst the player base. GM Island remained a mystery for most of vanilla World of Warcraft. Vanilla WoW footage is pretty rare and not in a lot of areas, and the WoW footage that does exist is mostly PvP oriented or in such low quality that it's hard to even tell what's happening. There's a somewhat infamous video released in early Burning Crusade that was released on YouTube called Going to GM Island and Getting Banned. And this is probably the first real instance that I can recall, or most people can recall, of a public eye of a player going to GM Island. This video was released by Patchychan on September 24th, 2007. We'll leave a link to it in the description if you want to check it out. As of the time I record this video currently has 2.4 million views, so it's quite a cult classic when it comes to old school WoW videos, and the way it's constructed is pretty old-fashioned. Even though it's pretty obvious throughout the video that this player is using model editors and texture manipulation to get to the island, and they even add to that in the description, some people thought that their path was legitimate. No, one look at the description will tell you otherwise. The reaction to this video was pretty acclaimed for the most part, and in some cases quenched the thirst for knowledge about GM Island of some of the player base. However, it didn't cover what was the point of this island. It exists in the game, so surely it has a point. However, this island is never mentioned by GM specifically. They act as if it has never existed. Even today, 15 years later, just continues to add to the mystery of this strange island off the coast of Teldrassil. There is a known room to exist within the mountain below GM Island that is just a gray cube that has a grid-like texture to it and just a singular spotlight with a chair in the middle. And if you mouse over it, it is just labeled the chair. To add to the almost unsettling nature of this hidden room on GM Island, prior to patch 1.3, this area was actually scripted in a way that if any player found itself inside this room, you could not find them using the /who command. It's as if the person disappeared. Once this initial room was discovered, it only added to the unsettling mystery that was GM Island. This room is so mysterious that even to this day, only a handful of GMs have even laid eyes on the zone. This room is only believed to be used in the very, very early days of World of Warcraft before patch 1.3. Because in those very early days of World of Warcraft, GMs did not have a legitimate method to speak to players directly outside the means of the game. Therefore, it is believed that this room was used to take major offenders here to interrogate them in a way. Of course, this is only speculation. The actual land of GM Island itself is actually very simple. Some trees that seem to be imported from Feralos, as well as a very similar ground texture. The keep from Stormwind is also included here, along with a small dock and boat, and a notable graveyard. To add to the unsettling mystery that is GM Island, if you hover over one of the gravestones, it reads Eliza's tombstone. However, this tombstone is actually a reused asset from Duskwood. It's part of the Abercrombie quest chain in vanilla Duskwood. In the lead up to Cataclysm, when the pre-patch launched with patch 4.0.3a, Azeroth itself found a transformation in the Cataclysm expansion, but so too did GM Island. A very strange transformation, but a transformation nonetheless. Following the Cataclysm pre-patch, ever since then, GM Island has had its ground texture completely stripped away and has just been a gray, untextured landmass surrounded by water. My theory to it suddenly becoming untextured in Cataclysm was with the revamp of the zones, Feralos was also slightly changed, and the ground texture may have been changed from the original ground texture that was also reused on GM Island. And since GMs have never really had any real practical use for the island, it simply just remained untextured. Ever since Cataclysm and this change was implemented, GM Island has seen a steady decrease in interest over the years, both by GMs and the player base at large. And while we may never know the true purpose of GM Island, I personally believe it was used in the very early days of World of Warcraft to monitor the game in a way that allowed them to easily log in and log off and get to different locations throughout the world in a quick and efficient way. But since these early days of WoW, GMs really just have no practical use for GM Island anymore. They can turn themselves invisible and hide themselves amongst the player base for testing. GMs do not need to have a exclusive location like GM Island anymore. It has simply outlived its usefulness. Couple that with Blizzard's new policy on exploration and unreachable zones, and it's no wonder why the island is being removed, as there is just really no reason for it to even be there anymore. Regardless of these facts, it is still quite sad to see a piece of WoW history that largely has remained untouched by history simply disappear. Blizzard may have never intended to actually have any real use out of GM Island and simply just wanted a place for GMs to be off the grid. Regardless of these facts, GM Island has cemented its place in gaming history, and its presence in the game will certainly be missed. All is not lost, however, for fans of GM Island, as Classic WoW is right around the corner, and GM Island will be making a glorious return in Classic WoW. Thank you, Blizzard, and thank you, GM Island. It's been a pleasure.